Well, hey there, friends. I'm your host, Penny, and this is Criminally Nerdy. What's up, everybody? Long time no talk, huh? Ugh, I missed you guys. I hope you have all been out there absolutely crushing it. Hell, I don't need to hope. I know you all have been because you are all badasses. Things in my world have been very, very busy, but still good. I am inches away from opening up my storage closet to unleash all of the spooky season decor. Before you judge me too harshly, shut the fuck up. This year is super fun because my youngest is 4 now, so he's finally old enough to really start getting into it. He's already talked my mother-in-law into buying him a couple of decorations when they're out and about, and he's like coloring pictures from his Wednesday coloring book and hanging them all over the walls downstairs. And then my 9-year-old, he's chomping at the bit, walking around trying to decide what's going to go where, and it's just super cute. Whereas my 19-year-old and my wife, they, tolerate us. In podcast world, you may have noticed that there was no new episode again last week. I am very sorry about that, and as much as I really hate this, and I've been dreading it, because of how much longer the episodes are now versus when I started the show, I'm going to have to go to releasing new episodes every other week. I shall see you fortnightly going forward. Don't leave. There are caveats. If an episode is a 2-parter, the second episode will come out the following week. I won't make you wait 2 weeks for a conclusion. That's just mean. And my hope is that this is only temporary. As the show continues to grow, I will be able to put more time into it. If I could, I would spend all day, every day, researching and writing and bringing these stories to you. Like the rest of you, I've got that silly day job that commands my attention. I've also got some pretty cool little people at home who are still willing to hang out with me, so my hours in the day are limited. I assure you that I am putting everything I am able to give into this podcast. But in doing that, I need to be realistic with myself, and I also need to make sure that you, my amazing, badass listeners, know what you can expect. It's not what I want to do, but it's what's best for the quality of the content of the show. So for now, and hopefully only for now, that means going to an episode every other week format. Again, unless it's a 2-parter. If for any reason I stumble upon a smaller case and I'm able to get it out for you in the week in between, you know I will. So your best bet to make sure that you don't miss any of my glorious goofiness is by making sure that you have subscribed wherever you're listening. While you're there, make sure you're dropping a 5-star and maybe write a few kind words. Or weird words. Be you about it. You can also follow Criminally Nerdy on every social media platform, and I shout those out at the end. I post updates there as well. I love you guys. Let's keep kicking ass and taking names together, and someday I'll be dropping these suckers into your ears so often that you'll be like, oh my god, Penny, please just stop. This episode is airing on August 26th, which is National Toilet Paper Day, National Cherry Popsicle Day, and Melissa McCarthy's birthday. So, call into work. Have a popsicle, watch Bridesmaids or The Heat, and be thankful that you no longer have to wonder if there will be toilet paper when you go to the store. Just tell your boss that you have an appointment with Dr. McCarthy. I mean, laughter is the best medicine, right? Today is also Women's Equality Day. If you're here, I don't have to tell you that I'm passionate about gender equality. Perhaps it's a bit of kismet that it happens to fall on this episode, which, no, I don't plan ahead. I wish I could say I'm that prepared, but I am not. Today's case deals with heavy themes of domestic violence. If you are able, please volunteer, donate, or even share a post from a domestic violence prevention center to help bring attention to the issue. The title probably gave it away, but if you didn't notice, this will be a 2-parter. Today, we are going to be discussing a young wife and mother living in West Valley City, Utah, who seemed to vanish into thin air. The strange series of events surrounding her disappearance, the details about her life that came to light after she went missing, and the haunting clues she left behind were enough to make this investigation one that those involved would never forget. This is the case of Susan Powell. As I just mentioned, be warned that we will be discussing domestic violence in this episode. And as for this case overall, I just want to warn you now that the conclusion, part 2, will be very difficult to listen to, as it will deal with child pornography, voyeurism, suicide, and the murder of children. Some of my sources for this case were the podcasts Generation Y and That's Why We Drink, the Salt Lake City Tribune, and Susan Powell, an ID murder mystery documentary. Susan Marie Cox was the third of 4 daughters born to Chuck and Judy Powell on October 16, 1981. She was born while the family was living in New Mexico. They moved to Alaska for a short time before settling in Puyallup, Washington. Her family were Mormon and active members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, or LDS. Outside of being an active member of the church, Susan was a devoted sister and dreamed of being a cosmetologist. As a child, she was very close with her sister Denise because they were both outdoorsy and big animal lovers. At one point when they were little, they had formed a bird club and had something like 30 birds. Props to their parents, because as much as I love my children, I cannot imagine letting them have 30 birds. Denise said that Susan also loved to style and color hair as well as give manicures. The two said that someday they were going to open their own business called Beauty and Your Beast. It would be a combination of a salon and dog grooming where people and their pups could come and get pampered together. I know we tend to hear this a lot in true crime, but from every interview I saw and read about Susan, she truly was one of those people who lit up a room. She was kind and caring. She was outgoing and friendly. People were naturally drawn to her inner and outer beauty. At the age of 19, Susan attended an LDS singles event. Her parents had met through the church when they were young, so it seemed the perfect opportunity to hopefully meet someone who she would not only have a connection with, but who would have the same values. Susan caught the eye of a few different men, but only one caught hers, 24-year-old Josh Powell. One thing that stood out and definitely drew Susan to him was that he had a pet parrot named Charlie who he took everywhere with him. Susan was a bit sheltered, not having been out in the world much, so in her eyes, Josh was the whole package. He had already finished college with a bachelor's in business and had a job. He had his own car and his own apartment. To top it off, not only was he smart and romantic, Josh and Susan shared the same religious convictions. The two started dating, and after only 8 months, they were married on April 6, 2001. They lived with Josh's dad, Susan Powell, in South Hill, Washington for a couple of years to save up some money before they moved to West Valley City, Utah. They purchased a nice home on a quiet cul-de-sac. Susan had taken a full-time job working as an investment banker at Wells Fargo and was doing quite well. In fact, she was the breadwinner of the family, as Josh seemed to have trouble holding down a job. The couple welcomed their first son, Charlie, on January 19, 2005. 2 years later, they were overjoyed with the birth of their second son, Braden, on January 2, 2007. From the outside looking in, everything looked picture perfect for the Powell family. On Monday, December 7, 2009, Debbie Caldwell, family friend and daycare provider for Charlie and Braden, was concerned because the boys were very late. Susan always dropped them off at 6:30 in the morning. If they weren't going to be in or if they were going to be late, Susan always gave her a heads up. Since she hadn't heard anything and Susan was incredibly reliable, Debbie decided to make a few calls. She called Susan's work, but she wasn't in. She hadn't called off sick with one of my fabulous excuses, or put in for PTO. She was a no-call, no-show. Susan had never just not shown up to work. Debbie was really worried now, so she called Josh's work, but he was also out as a no-call, no-show. Though this wasn't out of character for Josh as an employee, it was raising alarm bells for Debbie that she couldn't reach anyone in the family. Knowing Susan as well as she did, she wasted zero time. She drove to their home and pounded on the door, but she got no answer. She looked around and noticed that there were no footprints on the freshly fallen snow, and a terrifying thought crossed her mind. Susan had just spoken with Debbie's husband about how to service her furnace to brace for the incoming snowstorm. She worried that something may have gone wrong and the family had suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning. Debbie called Josh's mother Terry and his sister Jennifer. All three had been calling Josh and Susan's cell phones repeatedly with no answer. They rushed to the house and all agreed that something was off and they needed to call the police to do a welfare check. The West Valley City Police arrived and determined that there was cause for concern, so they broke a window to gain entry to the home to search for the family. There was a momentary sigh of relief because the family was not in the home. There were no signs of forced entry and nothing in the house looked to be disturbed. They also noticed that the family's 2005 light blue Town & Country minivan was not parked in the garage. Okay, so maybe they went on a trip in the middle of a snowstorm. Weird, but possible. Kind of. It's possible that the family went on a trip, and it's not out of character that Josh would just not show up for work. But Susan had literally no history of just up and taking off without letting work or the daycare know. They also noticed a few other strange things, like the fact that Susan's things were still in the house. Her purse, her wallet, her keys, and her snow boots. The items found in the home, Susan's uncharacteristic behavior, and not being able to get in contact with the family was enough that the West Valley City Police Department assigned Detective Ellis Maxwell to assess the scene. He found that the couch had recently been cleaned and that 2 big box fans had been set up in the living room and were still running, blowing on a section of carpet. There had also been a radio left on that was playing pretty loudly. The circumstances were certainly odd, but it didn't appear that kidnapping or robbery were on the table, so they quickly theorized that the family must have gone for a drive. While out and about, they got caught in a snowstorm and their car may have slid off the road into an embankment and they were unable to get out or they had gotten into an accident. An APB was put out for the vehicle and calls were made to local hospitals searching for anyone who matched the description of Josh, Susan, Charlie, or Braden. Law enforcement, family, and friends were desperately searching and frantically making calls to no avail. And then, around 7 o'clock in the evening, the minivan pulled into the driveway. Inside, Josh was driving with 5-year-old Charlie and 3-year-old Braden in the back seat, but Susan was not with them. Josh was met in the driveway by Detective Maxwell. They asked where Susan was, but Josh seemed confused. He said that Susan should be at work. From there, he and the boys were immediately taken to the West Valley City Police Station to try to figure out what was going on. The boys were in the room while Josh was questioned. He told investigators that the night before, around midnight 30, he decided that he was going to take the boys camping because they wanted to make s'mores. When they asked why on earth he would take his sons camping in the middle of the night in a snowstorm, he said that it wasn't uncommon for them to do something like that, just up and go on a moment's notice, and that camping in a snowstorm wasn't a concern for them, as they were well prepared. When they pointed out to him, the boys had school/daycare and you had work, Josh said that he simply forgot that it was Sunday. Simply forgot what day it was. They asked about Susan, and Josh said that when he last saw her, she was going to bed after they had spoken about the last-minute camping trip, and that she had actually been the one to remind him to take the generator in case it got cold. He then loaded up the van and took the boys to Simpson Springs for the night, which, just for reference, is a little over an hour and a half away from their home. Pretty long drive in the middle of the night. When asked why he didn't answer any of the desperate calls they were making to him, he said that he was trying to conserve his cell phone battery in case he needed to make an emergency call because he didn't have a charger with him. When they asked Josh if he could think of anyone who might want to hurt his wife or have a grudge against her, he said he couldn't think of anyone. Everyone loved Susan. At this point, police now had to classify 28-year-old Susan as a missing and possibly endangered person. They released Josh to take the boys home and get some rest for the evening, but before going, Detective Maxwell asked Josh to come back for a formal interview the next day. What Josh didn't know was that he was already on their radar. I mean, yes, there is the tried and true trope of the husband did it, but there were also some legitimate red flags. You see, when Josh pulled up to the house, investigators saw not one, but 2 cell phones sitting in the center console of the van, one clearly plugged into a charger. Seeing as how Josh had just used the excuse of not answering their calls because he was conserving his cell phone battery because he didn't have a charger, he was already caught in a lie. There was also the whole he simply forgot what day it was. But if he thought it was Sunday, not Monday, why did he immediately say that Susan should have been at work when they asked where she was? Though the van hadn't been fully searched, their visual sweep noted that there didn't seem to be much camping gear, despite Josh suggesting that they were amply prepared. If you ask me, that's downright negligent when you say you're camping in below freezing temperatures with your very young children. What they did see were tarps, a gas can, blankets, a generator, and shovels. Another thing investigators found the day before was that things weren't quite as picture perfect as they seemed. They spent the entire day speaking with family and friends and quickly learned that while Susan was very well liked by pretty much everyone she met, Josh wasn't. He was kind of a dick. He was one of those know-it-all, condescending, tell you you're wrong about everything kind of guys. He was also a talker, a big talker, to the point where some people found him annoying and would avoid him so that they didn't have to listen to him drone on about whatever topic he was an expert on that day. But during his interview, he was short and sweet with his answers. They had also heard from family and friends that there had been some trouble in the marriage recently. The next day, Josh came into the station for his second interview. They asked Josh if they could do a thorough search of the van, and he agreed. And that was about as much cooperation as he was going to give. He was uncharacteristically quiet. He wasn't offering anything in the way of help in finding his wife, refusing to give even basic information. Mr. Big Talker doesn't seem to have much to say now that he's in the hot seat. Oh wait, there is one thing that he prattles on about. He cannot stop revisiting the fact that police broke a window to get into the house. He says that Debbie, the daycare provider, had a key, so they didn't need to break a window. He cannot let it go. They broke a window because they were afraid that he, his wife, and his children were in danger. And now his wife is missing. But that window, yeah, let's focus on that window. Detective Maxwell is not fazed by Josh's attempts to redirect the conversation and asks about the cuts on his hands. At that point, Josh became standoffish, saying that he should probably get a lawyer. When Detective Maxwell asked why he wouldn't just answer his questions so they could try to figure out where Susan was, Josh said that he was in over his head and he felt like they were trying to trap him on little things like the cuts on his hands. While he was being interviewed, Josh's mother had taken Charlie and Braden to a counseling center where counselors and detectives trained to work with children spoke with them. I've said it before and I'll say it again, if you're one of those people who go out and do research on a case after hearing about it, Google with caution. The tapes of the interviews are out there. They're not graphic or anything like that, but they are deeply heartbreaking to hear. They speak with Charlie, who remember is 5 years old at this time. They ask him about the camping trip and who went on it. Charlie says, "My dad, my mom, and my little brother." They repeat that back to him and they say, "Okay, so your dad, your mom, and your little brother." And he says, "Yeah." Charlie is then asked, "When you came home from camping, who came with you?" Charlie says, "My dad, and my mom stayed there." They asked Charlie where his mom stayed at the park, and Charlie said, "My mom stayed where the crystals are." This information was relayed back to Detective Maxwell. He was actually about to end his interview with Josh, but this gave him his second wind. He and another detective confronted Josh with what Charlie had said, but he denied that Susan had gone with them, sticking to his story that she had stayed home, sleeping. They flat out asked Josh, "Okay, so your kids are lying then? Your kids lie?" And Josh flatly says, "Sometimes they do. I mean, if they said she was with us, they know that's not true." Detective Maxwell wasn't buying the shit he was selling. Josh was read his rights and told he would be detained. They knew there was more that Josh wasn't telling them, and were likely hoping that the threat of being detained would get him talking. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Josh didn't give them anything. Without a confession or evidence to work with, they had to let him go. But as he was leaving, Detective Maxwell made sure to let Josh know that he could not go home because it was now being processed as a crime scene. Josh had already consented to let investigators search his van, so he couldn't really back out now. He left the station in a cab, went to the airport, and rented a car. And this is something I just want you to keep in the back of your mind for now. Josh's father, Susan Powell, called into work around this time saying that he was sick and wouldn't be into work for a few days. Not a lot is known about what Josh did in that vehicle in the couple of days to follow. What we do know is that he drove 90 miles to buy and activate a new cell phone, and by the time he returned the car, he had put over 800 miles on it. So you're telling me that from the Salt Lake City International Airport you couldn't find anywhere to buy a cell phone for 90 miles? Seems legit. Back at the Powell's home, police have executed the search warrant where they have removed tons of computer hardware. Towers, external hard drives, disks, you name it. They found drops of blood on the floor in the living room next to the couch that were positively identified as Susan's. However, it wasn't a significant bloodletting event. It was likened to that of what would come out if someone had sneezed. And I mean, it's winter. The air is cold. People get bloody noses. People sneeze. And that's just one scenario. It was nowhere near enough evidence to warrant an arrest. What they did find interesting is that all of Josh's external hard drives were heavily encrypted. Whatever is on those drives, Josh didn't want anyone finding. They also found out that Josh had a life insurance policy on Susan for $1 million, which would be just over $1,450,000 today. During Josh's first encounter with investigators, they seized both phones he had in the van. As it turns out, one of them was Susan's, and both were missing their SIM cards. When they asked Josh why he had Susan's phone, he said he had been looking something up on hers and must have put it in his pocket and forgotten about it. When asked why both phones were missing their SIM cards, Josh said they must have fallen out. So let's talk about SIM cards. As far as phones today go, I don't even know where the SIM cards are at. But newer phones can be tracked whether they have one or not. That was not the case with older phones. You couldn't track a phone without one. And, I'm older than Google, so I can remember the cell phones we had back in 2009 and the SIM cards they used. There is no way one would just fall out. If I got a new phone and wanted to switch my SIM card from my old one to my new one, I would always have to take it into a store and have a professional do it because it was such a pain in the ass. But someone as tech savvy as Josh, he would have no problem removing them. And then there's the van. No forensic evidence was found during the search, but that might have something to do with the fact that on the night Josh was released from the station after his initial interview and well into the next morning, his neighbors remember he was carrying things back and forth from the house to the minivan and cleaning. Super normal behavior. In addition to the items they had seen initially, the tarp, gas can, blankets, generator, and shovels, they found a slew of other items. Like, so many that I'm shocked it all fit into one vehicle. Among the items were a folding hacksaw, a circular saw, an extension cord, a metal crowbar, and a box cutter. They also found a tote that did contain various camping supplies, but what was weird was that most of the camping items were still in the packaging. And it's not like he Houdini'd the tent back into its bag, which literally no one can do. It's that most things were never opened. The things that were opened were leather gloves, nylon ropes, a multi-tool, and fire starter sticks. That Thursday, December 10th, police searched the Simpson Springs campground but found no evidence that Josh had been camping there. They asked him if he would give a description of the area he and the boys had been camping or draw them a map, and he simply says, nope. They even offered to drive him to the campground and have him point out where they had been, but he refused to cooperate. Unfortunately, they got heavy snowfall on Friday that covered any footprints or tire tracks they may have been able to follow, so the search was halted. On Monday, Josh did what any concerned husband would do when his wife was missing. He hired a defense lawyer. On Tuesday, he failed to show up for his third interview he had scheduled with detectives. Other than providing a DNA sample and allowing police to search his vehicle, Josh had completely stopped cooperating with their investigation and was all but standing in the way of their efforts in finding his missing wife. That same day, on December 15th, Josh was publicly named a person of interest by the West Valley City Police Department. If you thought Josh's behavior was questionable up until now, buckle up, Buttercup. It's only going to get worse. 3 days after being named a person of interest in his wife's disappearance, Josh packed Charlie and Braden up and moved out of state into his father, Susan Powell's home in Puyallup, Washington, in the middle of the night, without telling anyone. Why would anyone do that? Maybe it's because he wanted to get away from the stress. Maybe he needed a break. Maybe he really just needed support from his family. Maybe it was because the pressure was starting to mount and it was only going to get worse since Charlie had just told his teacher that his mommy was dead. Josh initially said that the stay with his father was just for the holidays, but it didn't take long for him to change his tune. He rarely spoke to the media about Susan, but when he did, he rarely answered their questions. He was noticeably agitated by their presence, but not in an "I'm trying to protect my children from publicity," or "I need time to process," or "I need my privacy" kind of way. It was more of a "I just want to move on with my life and you're making it difficult" kind of way. Instead of voicing concerns about his wife's whereabouts, his biggest concerns, oh, you're gonna love it, was that he didn't have a computer was because his was taken during the search of his home. In early January, social media campaigns were launched by family and friends to spread word about Susan's disappearance. Though the media had already been covering the case, the surge of interest got their attention. Since they weren't getting anything from Josh, they reached out to Susan's father, Chuck, who agreed to speak to reporters. He wanted to keep his daughter's case in the spotlight, and he wanted her found. Missing persons posters were put up all over the place, along with purple ribbons, Susan's favorite color. Shortly after the influx of attention, Josh and his brother Michael went back to his home in Utah to pack it up. Josh said that he had been fired and could no longer keep the house. Did you get fired, Josh? Or did you just up and move out of state and probably never even told them? 'Cause that seems to be your pattern. Later in the month, the two came back to make some repairs to the home so that Josh could attempt to rent it out. While there, the West Valley City Police Department served another search warrant that allowed them to seize the van Josh had been driving on the night that Susan disappeared. I couldn't find anything that said they obtained new evidence by seizing the vehicle, but honestly, if it fucked his day up, it was worth it. If you decide that you're not going to actively help in the ongoing investigation to help find your missing wife, and they decide to put Detective Petty Mayonnaise on the case, I'm here for it. Josh was getting really upset that Susan was being portrayed as this sweet, innocent, loving mother and housewife, while he was being painted as the bad guy. Instead of realizing that he and his actions alone were to blame for this, he decided that now would be a good time to turn the tables and start telling his own version of the story. He starts saying that Susan ran away from her family. He alleged that she was emotionally abused as a child. He claimed that Judy was volatile and that Chuck was manipulative. His theory was that she hadn't mysteriously disappeared, but that she had run away. She up and left her husband and children to get away from her parents. She ran away from her parents? Okay, Josh, even if I take the husband and children out of the equation here, Susan is 28 years old. She owns her own home. She has a successful career. She is not living with or financially dependent on them in any way. So what the fuck is she running from? And just to be clear here, yes, her reputation, family, and friends were portraying Susan for who she was. But so was Josh. He told investigators and the media before they started looking in his direction, that Susan would never just up and leave. He said that Charlie and Braden were her whole world and that she was a wonderful mother. He was adamant that she would never abandon her children. That's one hell of a 180 there, my guy. On February 15th, Susan's family held a press conference. Up until this point, they had been supportive of Josh, describing him as a loving husband and father. In truth, sure, he could be a dick, but no one wanted to believe that he could have anything to do with this. But his actions since her disappearance, his allegations towards them, the things that Susan had confided in them before she disappeared, and the things that she found out she had confided in her close friends left them no choice but to face the reality that Josh had very likely done or was involved with whatever had happened to her. During the press conference, they stated that Susan had been a victim of domestic abuse and that on at least one occasion that abuse had gotten physical. They also revealed that Susan had told them she had given Josh an ultimatum about ending their marriage if he didn't make serious changes by their anniversary on April 6th. They also announced that they had created a nonprofit organization called the Susan Powell Foundation, which I will link in the show notes. Today, among other things, it helps to assist families of missing persons, research and catalog resources, spread awareness, and support domestic violence prevention efforts. If you are not aware, the most dangerous time for anyone in an abusive relationship is when they leave or are preparing to leave their abusive partner, and then the abuse tends to escalate. Not to mention that victims tend to play down the level of abuse, so there may have been more going on that she never felt safe enough to share. From what I can gather, Susan did tell her family bits and pieces about her marriage, but she glossed over some of what had been going on. They had picked up on things here and there over the years, but it wasn't until they connected with her friends that they were able to get the full picture. Susan had even told her friends that she had purposefully not told her family about some of the issues she and Josh were having because she didn't want to worry them. Before her disappearance, Susan had confided in her friends that her marriage was deeply troubled. In the beginning, it was wonderful. Josh swept her off her feet. He was loving and attentive, everything she could have hoped for. Being a married couple and sharing traditional views on roles, she didn't think twice about handing over her paycheck to Josh and letting him handle their finances because that was the husband's job. He seemed to be doing just fine because they were able to move out of his father's house and buy their own home in Utah. But when she got pregnant with Charlie, things started to change. Josh became distant and controlling at the same time. Susan tried to brush it off as just stress from the pregnancy, and she assumed that things would go back to normal once the baby arrived. But they didn't. They only got worse. Hell, they got worse before baby even got there. When Susan went into labor with Charlie, Josh made her call her parents to have them come take her to the hospital because he was busy. Busy? You're busy? Your wife is in labor with your child. Oh, this motherfucker. Her parents came to take her to the hospital because even if she wasn't in labor, she wasn't allowed to use the family car without permission. Josh didn't show up to the hospital until hours later. When he finally did show up, he sat in a chair off in the corner playing on his laptop, seeming annoyed with having to be there for the birth of his child. I'm gonna break something. I cannot tell you how many times I wanted to flip a fucking table while I was researching this case. Finally, Susan's father, Chuck, goes into Papa Bear mode and tells Josh that he needs to get his ass over there and support his wife. I don't think those were his exact words, but I'm sure it was something to that effect. Beautiful baby Charlie was born on January 19th, 2005. Just 2 years later, beautiful baby brother Braden joins the family on January 2nd, 2007. By the time Braden was born, things had become downright unbearable for Susan. She told friends that she knew the exact date that Braden had been conceived because Josh withheld affection from her when he was angry with her and as another way to control her. He could control if and when she felt loved by deciding if and when he would give her a hug or a kiss. She said anything more than that was incredibly rare. In 2007, Josh filed bankruptcy on $200,000 worth of debt. It is unclear how much Susan knew about the debts, but it would seem like he wasn't handling the money very responsibly. And look, I completely understand that people fall on hard times. I've been there. I'm sure we've all been there. I have absolutely zero judgment. But they hadn't fallen on hard times. Even with Josh's shaky employment, Susan's income was enough to cover their expenses. They would just need to cut back a bit on extras during the times when he wasn't bringing home a paycheck. But that wasn't going to work for Josh. Josh was going to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. If that included new hobbies like remote control cars or expensive computer equipment, he was going to buy it. When they got married, she assumed that she would freely have access to their bank account, but Josh crushed any hopes of financial transparency in their relationship early on. When she would go to use the bank card, she would find out that he had changed the PIN number without telling her, forcing her to have to go to him for money. He would give her a small allowance, and if she wanted something extra, she would have to justify it, which she was usually unable to do because he didn't think money should be spent on anyone other than himself. And I do mean anyone. Susan had resorted to hiding small amounts of money throughout the year so that she could buy the boys Christmas presents. Obviously not justifiable. Your children opening presents on Christmas? Balderdash. But Josh spending thousands of dollars on computer equipment? Oh sure, no problem. Now I will say that I have seen reports where Josh was very involved with his children, often taking them on outdoor adventures like camping. But after learning everything I did in this case, I can't help but wonder if it was more for them or for himself. Okay, so what about household items like groceries? With the traditional roles, grocery shopping was Susan's job, and she didn't mind doing it. But don't go thinking those groceries were at her discretion. Oh no. Josh became Michael Scott, and not in a good way. He decided he was going to make it way harder than it needed to be. He would look up what was on sale and where it was on sale, because he has that kind of time since he's hardly ever working, and would give her an itemized list of what she could buy, where she could buy it, and what the price should be. I shit you not, he would write down the price, item by item. He would then send her ping-ponging around town from store to store. If something cost more, even by a few cents, she wasn't allowed to buy it. If she did buy something that was out of budget, because maybe the ad was outdated, or maybe it was misprinted, or maybe she was just fucking tired from working and having 2 toddlers and a grown-ass man-child that she had to cater to, she would have to deal with the consequences when he compared the receipts. As time went on, he expanded his control to the children by putting limitations on what they could eat and how often. Are you fucking kidding me? It eventually went to the point where he would not allow Susan to buy meat. They were not a vegan or vegetarian household. It was not for dietary, health, or environmental reasons. It was simply about control. And if you're wondering, I'm sure it will come as absolutely no surprise that Josh spared no expense when it came to his own snacking. He could eat whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. He would buy himself things like chips and salsa that no one else was allowed to touch. And I cannot fathom what kind of complete and total piece of shit you have to be to sit there and eat chips and snacks in front of your hungry children while telling them they can't have any. And when I say hungry, I mean hungry. Charlie was actually diagnosed with malnutrition due to Josh's restrictions. When Susan confronted him about the diagnosis and told him that he needed to let her feed them more, Josh said, quote, "He gets 1 meal a day at daycare and that's all he needs. You're not wasting my food on him because he's just going to poop it out." Yeah, you dumb motherfucker, that's how the digestive system works. When I tell you that quote sent me, just wow. And before we go any further, You want me to believe that your penny pinching, no problem letting my children go hungry ass decided to just up and take your kids camping because they wanted s'mores? Totally checks out. Desperate, Susan went to her friend Kiersey and asked for a package of hot dogs to feed the boys. Susan had spoken to her before about the struggles that she had had with Josh, and Kiersey had seen the tension between them, but she could tell that Susan was at a breaking point. Susan did not want to get a divorce for a multitude of reasons. She did love Josh and hoped that this was something that could be fixed. It did go against her religion. She didn't want that life for her children. She wanted them to be a family. And in all honesty, she was afraid of what would happen if she did leave him. Kiersey, who was also of the Mormon faith, told her that what she was going through with Josh was not healthy. She told Susan that she understood that she didn't want to get a divorce, but that she needed to do what was best to take care of herself and her children. She assured Susan that her friends and family would love her and would be there to support her. Sometime in the summer of 2008, Susan met with a divorce attorney. Kiersey knows this because she watched the boys so that Susan could go to the meeting. Afterwards, Susan told Kiersey that the lawyer had told her to document their possessions, including the inside and outside of the home and the shed, so that if they were to get divorced, Josh could not hide any of his financial assets without splitting it evenly with her. The lawyer told her to hide the documentation somewhere where Josh could not find it and destroy it. During their investigation, detectives went to the Wells Fargo where Susan worked to see if there was anything her coworkers might know. They end up finding something that Josh didn't know about. Her friends didn't know about. Her family didn't know about. Susan had a safe deposit box in the vault. They went to open it, but there was just one problem. The bank had the control key, but Susan would have the individual box key. Without her key, they couldn't determine what, if anything, relevant to the investigation was inside, and Josh had already packed up the house and moved to Washington. Detective Maxwell thought back to the scene on the day that Susan went missing, and a light bulb went off. All of her belongings that had been left at the house were taken into evidence before Josh had gotten home. In her purse, there was a single key that was not on her key ring. By a stroke of luck, it was the key that opened the safe deposit box. Inside, they found a video. It was taken on July 29, 2008 by Susan. In the video, she says, quote, "Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me, or my family, or all of us, that our assets are documented. I hope that everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible." The video moves through the home showing all of Josh's computer equipment that she said he had pimped out with upgrades, his 5 hard drives, dual monitors, camera, treadmill, and other items. Most of them in the video appeared to belong to Josh. It is not until towards the end of the tape that she gets footage of her jewelry and her jewelry stand. It is clearly broken, and Susan can be heard saying, "Well, Josh broke this when he was mad at me one day." There is also a piece of paper in the safe deposit box that is folded and stapled. On one side it says, "Susan's last will and testament." On the other side, it says, "Do not show this to Josh, or give this to Josh. I do not trust him." In a handwritten letter, Susan states that she wanted to document it somewhere that there was extreme turmoil in her marriage. She expressed concern that Josh had taken out a large life insurance policy on her. She writes, "I would never leave you," speaking to Charlie and Braden, as well as, "take care of my boys." Most hauntingly, she writes, quote, "If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one." And that, my friends, is where we will end part 1 of the case of Susan Powell. That's all I've got for you today, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. If you would like to make a donation to the podcast, there will be a support the show link in the show notes, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/criminallynerdypodcast. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Criminally Nerdy Podcast, Twitter, X, whatever, at Crime Nerd Pod, or shoot me an email anytime at criminallynerdypodcast@gmail.com. Till next time, keep it nerdy. How many dogs did you take? 9. I took 9. I did slightly overcommit. Nin 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 nin. I got a frog in my throat. BANANAS. Are you kidding me? No, fuck. Fuckity fuck. Shit. Fuck. Damn it. Fuck. But who would have... You guys, seriously? I need to start doing a video and recording this so you can see my, shenanigans. Kronk! I met a dolphin down there. No, that's a parrot. What's the difference between a parrot and a parakeet? The parrot talks. Okay. Quidditch. Oh my god, was that my belly? What the fuck? I don't like that at all. I can't. Fucking shit. He said, I've been to the year 3000. If you're not in trouble, you're not doing your job. Holy shit, did I finally get that sentence out? This is all bad. Tell him I'll be there sharply at go fuck yourself o'clock, if there's no traffic. I didn't like that. What's my problem with the words? Michigan? What the fuck? $14? Is this magic fucking whiskey? Do I get a motorcycle with it? That sounded weird. It's way on the other side of the fucking country, Penny. That was dumb. I'll put that box inside of another box, and then I'll mail that box to myself, and when it arrives, I'll smash it with a hammer!